Assalamu alaikum. How are you? This is the Sacred Brew. Before I move on, a reminder to subscribe and what do they say? Click on the bell icon so you can get a notification for when I next put out a video. This is the next installment of Sacred Brew. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. All right. What are we talking about today? Well, before we get into what has been on my mind, just wanted to let you know I'm coming to you from Melbourne, and it is cooling down. Yeah, it's really getting cold here in Melbourne. It was I think 7 degrees this morning, and for those of you that have joined me for the first time on the Sacred Brew, it's my love for coffee and all things spiritual and our deen. I've been on a journey now for a very long time, which really hasn't been shared with many. And really, for me, this is the first time I'm actually sharing all of this as well. But before we get into what I've been really thinking about, there was an interesting publication put out by the World Economic Forum, and it talked about the threats for the next 2 to 3 years. And I'll let you go ahead and Google World Economic Forum statistics and data. But what was interesting was about that particular report, they said that for the next 2 years, the biggest threat will be misinformation, disinformation. And it's something that we should be very aware of and mindful of, especially in a world that is controlled by AI. The images that we see, some of the work that is shared, some of the writing that we read is, who knows how much of it is AI generated, but we do know that it is AI generated. And so what misinformation does is, if you look at it at sort of a mass level, because so many of us aren't really bothered with doing much research or getting into what the works behind what happens when a particular report is released, and so we take information as it appears. We give ourselves into this misinformation, and really a case in point is the tragic attack that took place in Pahalgam, and a lot of images that were used in particular by the Indian media really is testament to what we're calling misinformation. And perhaps what I'll do is I'll get to that in a later installment, but it is our biggest threat to all of us, misinformation. I guess the invitation there is to always ask, and something that I ask myself, what is it that I'm not seeing? And the purpose behind that question is to get into a mode of curiosity. Many images that are being used by Indian media, that suggest of imminent attacks and helicopters doing the rounds, and they're all images that have come from previous years, from 2020, I think, certain military exercises. But the point being that there is a lot of misinformation, and a lot of this is now being fed to us as consumers of multimedia platforms, and we take it as it appears. And so this can really lead to increased polarity, and can really lead to some, what's the word, counterproductive discussions based on nothing. So I just wanted to share that, but I do want to get into that. In fact, I've got my kids in the background, and they're trying their best to be silent, but my youngest one is trying. And so that's the invitation, and I will touch on this. But what I really wanted to touch on right now, and a lot of you have reached out, thank you very much, and saying, we'd love for you to share some of your experiences, even though I don't think my experiences mean a lot. They're just my experiences and what I've learned. There's something that, growing up, when I was in high school, my brother and I, we really had an inclination to learning more about the deen. And I don't know how it was in your family, but in our sort of family and extended family, it wasn't really encouraged. Yes, it was good that you were doing it, but there was always a sense of, you've still got time. And mind you, in high school, there's a lot of time. You when you get older, then you can get into it. You got to balance deen and dunya. You got to just take it easy with the deen. Don't get just do it, but keep a balance between deen and dunya. And and so life happened, and I find this question very interesting. How does one balance deen and dunya? Well, let me tell you how you can balance deen and dunya. And also, I think what is important is whatever I share with you is really a reflection of myself and a reminder to myself. And I'm just using this sort of exchange to remind myself, to be honest. So, how does one balance deen and dunya? Well, if we just take away deen and dunya and we talk about balancing, how does one balance? How does one balance, for example, life and life at home and at work, for example? Not a very good analogy, but how does one balance things? Maybe you can give me some examples. How does one balance? Again, my youngest is trying us out. Would you like to come in the camera, Ali? No. Okay, because I can see you. He's having fun. So how does one balance things? When you talk about balancing things, how do you balance good and bad? Or how do you balance, what is a balance? And when you talk about balance, what you're doing is you're separating that which is being balanced. So when we talk about, balancing, for example, work and family, work life and family life, what you're doing is you're sort of separating the two. This is my work life and this is my family, right? And so what you're doing is you're separating the two. That this is my work and this is my sort of family time. So how do I balance work and family time? So they're both on different scales. They're both separated. Does that make sense? So when you talk about how do I balance, it could be anything. What you're really implying is how do I separate the two and put them on these scales? Balancing is about scaling the two, right? Well, my question to you is how do you separate deen and dunya? Can you actually separate the two? And is one a function of the other? But because when you say, how do I balance deen and dunya? What you're doing is you're separating deen and you're separating dunya. And I find that very question to be flawed. Because the reality is you can't actually balance deen and dunya. Because what you're saying is, I'm going to separate deen and dunya. But that's not really how it works. Dunya, or this world, which is also by some scholars defined as distraction, this world of distraction where we're caught up in so much, especially in today's world, an acquisition of things, acquisition of money, there's an acquiring of status, there's an acquisition of wealth, and that wealth can come in many different forms: a big house, a big car, multiple businesses, and so on and so forth. The list goes on and on. And I've got my deen. And my deen is my worship, my outwardly worship, my salah, my zakat, and my fasting, and all the sort of externality of my worship. But what it is really, for me, is that, and I take this from my teachers, is that dunya, this world that we're engaged in, is a function of deen. So for me, it's not about how do I balance, but the thing is, how do I integrate my work into my deen? How do I integrate my family life into my deen? How do I integrate my work life into my deen? How do I integrate every moment of my waking hour and minute back to the deen? So there's no balancing, there is an integration. And everything is enveloped within the deen. See, the deen we often think of, when we mention the word deen, we often go immediately into a worship, and which is correct, but our idea of worship is the outwardly actions. But in fact, when we talk about worship, when we talk about deen, we talk of akhlaq. we talk of good character. And deen without akhlaq is zero, and akhlaq without deen is zero. So when you're actually talking about deen and you talk about worship, you're also talking about akhlaq. How do I develop good character? How do I soften my tongue? How do I clean my heart? How do I reorient and recalibrate my mind from makhluk to khaliq? Because that's what we're doing here. We're saying that there's that differentiation, and what we're trying to do is really shift from and I love my audience in the back to kind of calm down. I know they all want to give me a standing ovation. So how do I shift here and here from makhluk to khaliq? And there are other shifts too, but let's just stick with one right now, and that is essentially what we're doing. So is he here? Is he in frame?
No, the shadow is.
Oh, hey, how's it going? So this is live. This is happening right now, and I'm not going to edit this out. This is live. So how does one balance? You don't balance, because dunya is a function of deen, and deen envelops everything, and deen equals akhlaq. And what we're doing is we're shifting from makhluk to khaliq. In other words, we're shifting from everything outside of us having agency and control over us to the one creator that has control over everything. Kulli shayn qadir, who's control over everything. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, power and strength. There is no other power and strength except Allah. So that's what we're shifting. And so for me, it really is about integrating the two. It is about how do we, when we talk about worship, how do we make every action of ours with an intention of worship, whether it's sleep, whether it's the time we awaken, when we are interacting with our colleagues, when we interact with our kids, when we interact with our spouse, when we're the mundane things. What is our intention behind our actions? إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. Our actions are by our intentions. And so by our intention, we can make that very mundane act an act of worship. And so, wherever we turn is the face of Allah. And so that gives us the opportunity to make every single mundane and otherwise moment an act of worship. And so for me, that is what it is. It's not about balancing deen and dunya. It's about understanding that dunya is a function of deen. And so how do we make every single moment a worshipful moment? You see what I mean? So that is for me how I would take this. And it's not about balancing deen or dunya, because you can't separate the two. One is a function of the other. And in this case, dunya is a function of deen. And it comes down to your intention. It comes down to, how do I make every living moment an act of worship? And that's not easy, because we are constantly faced with distractions, with challenges, and that's the whole point of it all, is to be able to, when we're faced with that challenge, our qalb, which by the way, by definition is that which turns, and so the heart turns, it turns towards distractions, it turns towards makhluk, and now we're looking for a sense of gratification and validation from makhluk. We're looking outward, validate me, validate me, validate me, and we've given the makhluk agency over how we feel. And then when we realize, oh, I need to recalibrate, and we turn the heart, the qalb again, towards the khaliq, and that is where I will find peace, not in makhluk. And so that's the shift that the prophets have also taught us, the shift from makhluk to khaliq. and that there is no balancing of deen and dunya, because there is no separation of deen and dunya. Dunya is a function of deen, and so how do I make every living moment an act of worship through my intentions? They're just some thoughts that I wanted to share with you, and again, open to your comments, your questions, and maybe perhaps even suggest what you'd like to talk and what you'd like for me to talk about the next time we meet. I do want to talk about misinformation and disinformation. I just wanted to mention it right now. And I think I will bring this up at a later point. Inshallah, looking at having some guests on about how we navigate social media with our children. As a parent, that concerns me, as I'm sure it does you as well. But so many beautiful guests to bring into this landscape. And I invite you to ask your questions, maybe suggest topic, a discussion that we should take up next time. But that is this installment of Sacred Brew. Again, if you feel like it, subscribe, share the video, and we'll speak to you again. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد صلاة ترضيك وترضي وأن تنتوي بها آمالي ونيتي وهلكاتي وسكناتي في وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.